Nowadays, the paranormal rarely scares me. It has become something I'm simply accustomed to. I'm comfortable knowing that there are things in this world beyond my realm of understanding. This attitude is due to one major factor in my life. I was terrorized by something sinister for 4 years of my adolescence. I'm from a small town in the southeast of England, bordering London on one side and rolling hills of farmlands on the other side. When I was 13 years old, we moved from our previous home within this town to another larger home on the other side of town. The property was beautiful, built on a hill with a large back garden bordering a forest. For the first few weeks of living in the house, everything seemed normal. Nothing strange happened and life was idyllic, until one Saturday morning in September. I woke up before the rest of my family, deciding to head down to the kitchen to fix myself breakfast, while I stared out at the forest. As I was waiting for the kettle to fire up, I heard this sudden low growl directly in my left ear. It was incomprehensible, just deep and guttural and loud. I yelled loudly, bolting out of the kitchen and running up to my parents. I burst through their door in hysterics, abruptly waking them up. I was near tears as I explained what happened, but my dad dismissed me kindly, saying, "It was probably just the kettle. When we're sleepy, our minds can play tricks on us." I knew he was wrong, but I didn't feel like trying to argue my point. The kettle hadn't even started bubbling when I heard that growl. Besides, why would the sound reverberate only in my left ear? I tried to shake off the fear that was forming in the pit of my stomach and move on with my day. Thankfully, the 13-year-old mind is capable of doing that pretty easily. I wish I could tell you that the growl was the worst of my experiences in that house, but it was just the beginning. A few months passed and Christmas rolled around. My older cousin moved in with us. At the time, she was starting university in London. After that, the activity within the house began to escalate. My cousin began to have terrible night terrors. Terror so bad that I would hear her yelling out in her sleep from my bedroom across from her. For context, our bedrooms were opposite each other's near the top of the stairs. Next to my cousin's door was our family's altar, with both Jesus and the Hindu goddess Kali, because my mother is Catholic and my father is Hindu. This will be important later. My cousin's night terrors became so bad that she was hardly sleeping at all. When questioned by my mother and I about what she dreamt about, my cousin explained that every night she would dream of a large dark mass that would attack her in her bed. She said it felt dark and powerful, all-consuming. My mother, being quite superstitious, pinned a blessed cross on the inside of my cousin's sleep shirt. After that, my cousin's night terrors seemed to cease. I think that's when it decided to target me. It started off small, the occasional nightmare of a skeletal figure crawling on my bedroom walls, hearing voices whispering unintelligible things at night, and the occasional footstep coming from our attic at night. Then it started to escalate further. One day I came back from school to a rather noisy kitchen. I found that rather odd, as I was sure both my mom and cousin were at work and school, and my dad was definitely away for a work trip. Yet as I listened closer to the noise, I could distinctly make out the voices of my family members. They were talking joyfully. Shaking away my disbelief, I stepped forward and opened the door to the kitchen. Like somebody pressing pause on a TV, the noise abruptly stopped. I stared into an empty, cold kitchen. My skin immediately broke out into goosebumps, and all the hair on my arms stood on end. The kitchen felt icy and unwelcoming, like I'd interrupted something. Breaking out of my frozen state, I turned and sprinted up the stairs to my room. I only came out when I heard my mom come home from work, checking first to see that her car was in fact in the driveway. From there on out, it just kept getting worse. More small experiences kept happening on a weekly basis. Notably, a screw light bulb unscrewed itself and fell on my head while I was on the toilet. Now, in any other circumstance, that would be funny to me. However, in that moment, it was terrifying. The voices would continue on a daily basis, as well as the footsteps in the attic that would occur every day at exactly 4 a.m. Around this time, my mother and I began to constantly fight, and I began to slip into a deep depression. The next big encounter didn't happen inside the house, but in the back garden. It was around 3 a.m. I was awake, unable to fall asleep. From the gap between my blinds and the wall, I could see multicolored lights. Slightly shifting about, I peered out to see firefly-like orbs floating around my garden and the neighboring woods. Honestly, they didn't scare me. I suppose I just assumed they were fireflies, even though fireflies don't glow different colors. I continued to stare out at the beautiful light, completely transfixed until they all suddenly stopped glowing, leaving me in darkness. I didn't have long to sit in my confusion, as one of the motion sensor lights in the garden suddenly went off, revealing a horrifying sight. Lighting up the path that led into the forest, the lights revealed a creature crawling up the garden path. It was small and bald, a white, thin beast which resembled an emaciated man. It was so skinny that I could see its bones protruding with every step it took. Ribs and hip bones with nearly translucent skin stretched over top. I couldn't see its face or hear it make any noise. Not that it really bothered me, as I wasn't that keen to see its face. My brain could not comprehend what I was looking at, and I tried to rationalize it. A diseased badger? A mutated deer? A crazed man? Honestly, no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I just could not find an answer as I stared at it in terror. The only thing I can equate it to is the rake creature from creepypasta fame. I watched on as it walked and finally disappeared into the dark woods. I couldn't look away even if I tried, and I'm just glad that it didn't see me. As you can imagine, I didn't get much sleep that night. Later on, I found out from a few neighbors that many Satanists had taken to doing rituals in those woods behind our house. Many hikers had also found bones out there, tied in fabric and placed in strange formations all around the woods. The night terrors began to become a nightly occurrence, always the same thing. That horrible skeletal figure with red eyes, scaling and crawling my bedroom walls, never tearing its eyes off of me. It never touched me, just crawled and clicked at me. I don't think I got peaceful sleep once in all those years I lived in that house. The activity reached a crescendo when we finally moved out of the house. While packing up the house, my mother had an experience. My parents' bedroom was on the side of the house beyond the altar, and the family bathroom was on the other side of it, near my and my cousin's rooms. On a Sunday morning, while no movers were at the house, my dad had taken my cousin and I out for breakfast, while my mother rested. According to my mother, after she heard us all leave, she settled back into bed. As she was reading her phone in bed, she heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Then, a few moments later, the family bathroom door slammed shut. Confused and slightly afraid, my mom called my dad, asking him if he had come back to the house to use the bathroom. "No, baby, I'm driving. Why?" my dad replied. My mom asked him to come home quickly, detailing what she had heard. Creeping out of bed, my mom gently closed her bedroom door and locked it. She didn't come out until we came back home. The last night we were in that house, we were finishing up the last bits of packing boxes. I was upstairs helping my dad gather and pack all the wires from our computers. It was around 11 p.m. then. "I'm gonna go get something to eat. You finish up and come down for some dinner. Mom cooked," my dad said. I nodded and confirmed I would be done in 5 minutes. I watched as my dad headed down the stairs, slightly nervous to be left alone upstairs with no altar to protect me as it had been packed and put in our new house. But as promised, I finished packing the wires and began to head down. As I passed my now old room, I froze. The door was wide open, but none of the light from the landing could pierce the thick black darkness inside. I found this odd. It defied any logical thinking my brain could conjure. I began to break out into a cold sweat, a sense of deep dread settling into my bones. Then I heard it, coming from deep inside my room. "Chloe, Bubbles." I wanted to faint right then and right there. It sounded like my mother, even using the sweet baby name she called me. Bubbles. It spoke again, but this time it sounded mocking, sounding less like my mother, and deeper and gravelly. Breaking my trance, I bit back my scream and fled down the stairs. I burst into the kitchen, startling both of my parents. They looked at me with concern, asking me what was wrong. I asked if they had called me, even though I was 99% sure they hadn't. No? Why? My mom questioned. I asked again, panicked now, if they had called my name. Nobody called you, Chloe. We've been eating, my dad answered, clearly becoming annoyed now. I dropped it, my stomach turning, as I imagined the thing in my room waiting for me to come back up those stairs. I was glad I didn't have to venture upstairs again after that. We finished packing, and we left that house behind. It's been years since I've lived in that house. I'm 22 now, and since then I've moved to Australia. My parents moved abroad too. After leaving that place, my family started sharing the experiences we all had in that house. Strangely, it made me feel better that I wasn't the only one experiencing things, even if my family didn't experience things with such strong intensity. I'll never be the same after what I faced in that house. Maybe it made me a stronger person, or perhaps it simply traumatized me. But it did definitely teach me one thing. There are things in this world that we will never understand. I've always lived near the forested areas of Texas. Our backyard is just a fence, and behind it, there is a huge, almost endless forest. I pretty much grew up running around that forest. I could never have imagined the terrible things that reside there. I was about 12 years old when this event happened. My mother had left to go shopping. My dad was at work, which left me at home with my sister. I'd been making dinner, while my sister sat in the living room, watching The Princess and the Frog. I had made a pot of mac and cheese. After I finished up in the kitchen, my sister and I sat on the couch watching the movie. It was on that scene where they turn into frogs. My sister was laughing when we suddenly heard an odd scratching sound. It sounded like it was coming from the backyard, where the woods were. It was odd, but I just thought it could have been a coyote. I've never been so wrong. The scratching continued for another 5 minutes when I suddenly heard a voice, an odd raspy voice like one coming out of a radio. It sounded near perfectly like my mother.
Children, let me in.
It said in this sickening sing-song voice. I froze. Why would my mother come in through the backyard? Why not through the garage like usual? I led my sister away from the door as the scratching continued. I set my sister in a closet, and I told her not to open the door until I told her to. As I closed the closet door, the backyard door had begun violently shaking. Whatever it was outside had begun screeching too, sounding like a mix of a human and a coyote. When it all at once stopped, the silence was deafening, almost sickening too. Suddenly, the realization hit me. A small tap was coming from behind me where the front windows were. I regret ever turning around, because there stood this thing. Its limbs were twisted. It had joints in all the wrong places. It looked almost like a deer and a wolf mixed. It had rotting skin, and I could almost make out a smile. I felt tears streaming down my face as I heard it laugh. A laugh coming from this thing. Rage and hatred towards this thing rose up in me. It was terrorizing me and my sister, who I could now hear weeping from the closet. But then I suddenly heard the sound of the garage doors opening. My mom was finally home. When I looked back to the window, the thing was gone. My mother walked in. She saw me crying and quickly ran over to comfort me. We went to get my sister out of the closet. I was just glad she didn't have to see that disgusting creature like I did. We told my mother what had happened. She passed it off as us having overactive imaginations, saying it was just a dog or coyote. But I knew it wasn't that. But what it really was, I don't know at all. Later that night, there was a constant tapping on my window all night long. That was the last I ever saw of it. I hope it was the final time I encounter it. This happened in October of 2021. I've lived in North Alabama my entire life, save for living in Mississippi when I had college classes. I'm a girl, but I've always been a sort of son to my parents, especially my dad. He had raised me hunting and fishing every chance we could get. He taught me how to walk quietly in the woods, how to stop every few steps to look around and listen to the woods and your surroundings. You'd think that with his background I'd be pretty comfortable spending my time in wooded areas, or just in rural outdoor areas in general. For the most part, I am. However, I get really intense paranoia when I'm in the woods after dark, and I never venture out without a firearm. After this experience, I'll never again question my preservation instincts. The night of my last birthday, my boyfriend surprised me with a little trip to a secluded riverbank, where he and I had gone hammocking before, as well as where my dad and I had spent many fishing excursions. He pulled into the boat ramp parking lot, turning into a smaller side road, and parked his truck with the tailgate facing the river and the hood right against the tree line. It was about 8 p.m. then, so it was already dark out, which put me on edge just a little bit upon arriving at the riverbank. I tried not to get too scared, though, and I focused on enjoying the evening my boyfriend had set up for us. He came prepared with an endless supply of goodies for me. Slice of cake, my favorite candy, soda, cheesecake, and he even blew up an air mattress for us to lay on in the bed of his truck. We stayed there listening to music, talking and enjoying each other's company for about half an hour, before a cop rolled into the parking lot. Knowing we weren't doing anything wrong, we didn't even have alcohol or anything of the sort, we exchanged small talk with the cop when he came to see what we were doing. "Well, this is new," he said at first, referring to a couple of teenagers on an air mattress in a truck bed on the riverbank at night. We laughed a bit with him, acknowledging that the situation probably seemed a little odd. But after some general exchanges with the cop, he ended the conversation with, "All right then, y'all be careful out here. Some crazy crap's been going on lately. Don't want y'all to get caught up in anything." We gave him a brief, "Yes sir, will do," as he got back in his car and pulled out of the parking lot. At this point, we had stuffed ourselves with cake and various other goodies, so we decided to just lie down together and look at the stars. A bit of time passed as we did so, and I'd become entirely at ease with being out there in the dark. I trusted my boyfriend. He's had a few more intense encounters than I have with wildlife, and just generally creepy situations in rural areas, so I felt safe with him. That was until twigs snapped from within the tree line that the hood of the truck was butted right up against. I shut up mid-sentence when I heard it. My boyfriend and I lay there still and silent while we waited to hear the noise again. Now, I've heard my share of animals in the woods, and I also know the general mannerisms of the animals we have in that area. For instance, I'd heard packs of coyotes howling along that same riverbank before, but I didn't think one lone coyote would venture so close to us with our music and lights from the truck. We don't have any large predators either. The occasional bobcat would come around, but they tended to be pretty shy, and any cat would definitely make sure to be completely silent when approaching something they weren't sure about. Some rustling went on from the same direction as the original twig snap, and I whispered to my boyfriend, almost inaudibly, "What was that?" He briefly put a hand over my mouth, a gesture telling me not to make a sound, which put my heart rate through the roof. We lay there, listening to what sounded like footsteps heading toward the parking lot along the tree line. This absolutely freaked me out. Whatever it was, be it a regular animal or something else, it was very close to us, and we were lying out in the open. These sounds traveled out of earshot, but we remained still and quiet for a bit longer to make sure whatever it was had gone far enough away from us for us to safely move around without imminent threat. I was close to tears by then, anxiously suggesting to my boyfriend that we should pack it up and leave, while he insisted that we would probably be fine staying a little longer. I felt awful about wanting to cut our night short, because his birthday surprise for me was really sweet, but my gut just was not having it. Reluctantly, he gave in to my suggestion of leaving. We packed everything back into the truck, me constantly looking around and listening every minute or so, until the only thing left to take was the air mattress. I'd leaned up against the side of the truck bed as he hooked up the pump to take the air out, when a goose called out from the riverbank about 10 yards from us. Not thinking much of it, we continued packing up, until we heard a more frantic goose call. And my boyfriend jumped out of the truck with a hasty, "That goose is being attacked. Get in the truck." He didn't have to tell me twice. From inside the closed vehicle doors, we listened as this goose on the bank screamed out several more times before being cut off mid-scream, having been finally killed. I was terrified at the moment. I couldn't make sense of why any normal animal would be so bold as to approach our vehicle, then actively kill another animal within a short distance of us. This thing didn't seem to have any fear. Sitting in silent panic as my boyfriend rubbed my arm to comfort me. He never got scared in situations like that. We allowed some time to pass before he said he would go back out and finish taking care of the air mattress. I was scared for him, imagining all kinds of scenarios where he could be attacked by something as I sat in the truck. I knew he had to get everything situated so we could drive away, though, so I watched through the back window and even cracked my door to keep an eye on him. Soon he finished with the air mattress, and he just sat it in the back seat. That's when a huffing sound came from the bank where we'd heard the goose dying. My adrenaline went insane then. I called out to him urgently and semi-quietly to get his butt back in the truck. But instead, he pulled out his flashlight and shined it along the bank, walking slowly in that direction. That idiot, I was thinking. I'd rather not sit here and witness his brutal death by some animal or thing, whatever it is. He stepped toward the parking lot, still shining the light down the bank. Then he stopped, and he said, "I see it." He spoke so calmly. I urged him again to get back to the truck, which this time he finally listened. Once he was in the truck with the door shut, I asked him what it was. Was it a coyote? A cougar? He cocked his head. No, neither of those. It was dark and low to the ground, and pretty big, too. That made up my mind. I told him to drive us out of there that instant, and he obliged. I never saw the thing he described, and I'm glad I didn't. My boyfriend has always internalized any fear or strong emotion, so I don't think his mild reaction to the encounter was phony. Later on, he admitted to me that he acted that way so I wouldn't get any more scared than I already was. I have no idea what it was that was lurking around us that night, but I'm grateful my birthday evening didn't turn out morbid. This happened in the autumn season of 2019. Now, in the living room of our house, we have our couches set against a big window, facing away from it. When you open the back door, the first thing you see is an old carport, about 30 feet in front of the door. Then off across your left is a small greenhouse about 50 feet away from the house. There's a juvenile oak tree about 5 feet behind that greenhouse. The house is old and small, as are the windows, so we can hear mostly everything that goes on outside. It's not very pleasant, truth be told, but we make do. My mother and I were sitting on the couch one evening. It was about 9 o'clock at night. I was on my phone, and my mom was watching TV. Since it was autumn, all the leaves from the trees had fallen onto the ground. We have a 25,000 square foot yard, and the most trees on the entire block, so the grass was almost blocked out by the sheer amount of leaves we had. So we're just sitting down, minding our own business, when we begin to hear the leaves rustling about. I don't think too much of it at first. After all, where we live is a pretty windy place. Then, clear as day, I hear running. Something with 2 legs was running through the leaves at an alarming pace. I looked at my mom to be sure I wasn't imagining things, and sure enough, she looked horrified. Now, she's an incredibly tough woman who fears nothing, but to see her looking scared, that scared me more than the thing outside. I grabbed a knife, and my mom grabbed her gun. We opened up the back door and turned on the porch light. Nothing, just pitch black. All our trees hide any form of light. We stepped outside and looked around us, using whatever light our phones allowed. While we could see the outline of the greenhouse, no details were really visible. I then began to hear an owl, which is incredibly bizarre because of where we live. There aren't any owls here. We live in a somewhat urban neighborhood. The closer I listened to it, the more fake this owl sounded. It was more like a man trying to sound like an owl, saying, "Woo, woo," over and over. I asked my mom, "Are you hearing that owl?" I never got an answer, because right before she opened her mouth to speak, we heard a slow and menacing knock coming from our greenhouse. It wasn't a fast knock. No, it was a taunting knock. Whoever was watching us wanted us to know it sees us. Knock, knock, knock. My mom pointed her gun to the greenhouse, but our phone lights let us see nothing. We weren't going to dare get close to the greenhouse. That hooing continued, slower this time. Every minute or so, we would hear it. My mom goes to pull the truck into the yard to shine the headlights at the greenhouse and illuminate whatever was here with us. That entire time, I never took my eyes off the greenhouse. I was looking for any form of movement, but still nothing. Knock, 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 it continued. Soon my mom pulled in the truck and turned on the brights. When my mother used to be fuming angry with me, she would yell and get this smile, an evil, twisted smile, like it was saying, "I'm gonna tear you apart." Well, my mother opened the truck door and leaned out just enough so she could point her gun at the greenhouse. When I saw her, she had that smile. I heard the owl again, and I asked once more, "Mom, do you hear that owl?" This time she responded, the smile dropping from her face, never breaking her gaze off the greenhouse. "Jude, that's not an owl. That's someone trying to scare you." That sentence sent chills down my spine. I started to cry. I ran inside and called my friend, tears streaming down my face. I wanted to call her and tell her goodbye because I was convinced that whatever was in our yard had horrible intentions and that I'd never see her again. I told her what happened, and she told me to breathe. She tried to calm me down, but to no avail. I then heard my mom call my name, so I told her goodbye and hung up, even though my friend was yelling at me not to go. I went back outside. My mom says the cops are on their way, and she needs to put the gun up. I told her that I'd stay outside to keep watch. We both made the mistake of taking our eyes off the greenhouse. When she went inside, I looked over at the greenhouse. That's when I was greeted by a gray figure peering at me. It was a solid 7 feet tall at least, because it was as tall or taller than the greenhouse itself. It was standing behind the greenhouse, but in front of the oak tree. Its arms are what I remember most. They were so insanely long. There were no other features, no face, no distinctions in the body, other than it being tall and gray. I looked at it, and I had to do a double take. By the time I looked again, it was gone, and so was the knocking and those hooing sounds. All of it gone, just like that. The cops arrived not too long afterwards. 2 cops go to the greenhouse, guns out. One of them goes inside the greenhouse and the other one checks around it. But nothing was found. No footprints in the leaves, no signs of life. They rolled it out as maybe a possum or raccoon. I didn't dare tell them about it. I know what I saw. People don't believe me, and if you don't, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me because I know it's true. I've done research about wendigos and skinwalkers, but I don't know if it can be one of those, because we live in an urban area. I've never seen it again. I've experienced things that aren't related to this, but I've never seen such a monster again in my life. I hope by the end of this, you realize that there are things in this world we don't understand. And to tell you the truth, I wish I never knew.